give you a minute to sit down. Although it's kind of informal, so that's fine. There were a lot of good questions and some pretty bad ones, but
there are no bad questions.
That's right. And so I apologize if we won't get to all of them, but I tried to pick some. And not surprisingly, amazingly, there were often 4 or 5 people with the same question, which is kind of interesting. So if you don't hear your version of it, it's just because I picked 1 or 2 as an example. The first question is from Patty M. You can shout out, Patty. Yay, somewhere? Okay, yay, okay, good. And the good thing about this is a question for both of us. Discuss your most memorable aha moment so that we can see if there were any similarities between Alan as an artist and Lawrence as a scientist. Now, that's a toughie, isn't it? Okay,
no,
you go first.
No, I'm just wondering if I can tell this to this audience.
No, really, it's fine because other than
try me.
Yeah, no, because no one's going to tweet anything you say, so don't worry about it.
I saw 2 amazing things that were aha moments. Actually, 3 aha moments, but the 2 that really made me understand things in a way I hadn't understood before was walking in a swamp with a German scientist looking for dragonflies. And then he takes me back to his lab and he shows me a video of the male dragonfly before he mates with the female, taking her by the wing and flipping her like that. And he said they all did that. And he wondered what it was until he looked at an extreme slow motion and he saw the male flip her, and I saw a white speck come out of the female, which was the sperm of the previous mating. So that the drive for the male's genes to be dominant, to persist, led to this behavior. Of course, he was not necessarily the last guy that day. But the other thing was just as amazing. I
can't compete. I'm sorry. Hey, go on.
Are you going to edit this out of the movie?
No, this is I just can't compete. Go on.
The other thing was in the Galapagos. So I was sitting looking with the scientists, looking at about 200 marine iguanas. And the big alpha male was on a big rock doing push-ups, looking very impressive.
I've seen that in the Galapagos.
Yeah. And then behind them were about 200 females, his harem. Mm-hmm. And beyond them were these smaller males, outliers, sitting like this. They had hand-like paws, and they were sitting with their paws up on their head like this.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Did you see this ever?
Yeah.
Isn't this amazing?
In the Galapagos.
When the big guy wasn't looking, the males on the outside edges would rush in, grab a female, pick her up, and rub her bottom with their hands, which had semen in it.
Oh.
So this was the same attempt on the part of the sea iguanas as the dragonflies to have their genes live forever.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
This
that's
was
my
such
most
a
amazing aha moment is to listen to you say.
Don't you think that's an aha moment?
It is an amazing aha moment.
What's your aha moment?
And in proof that you can never compete with sex, I'm going to give 2 that don't. But I want to give 2 because for me they represent different aspects of what it's like to be a scientist. One aha moment was when I was working, and there was a big problem in physics called the solar neutrino problem, which is the fact that there appeared to be these particles called neutrinos, which are amazing particles. You all know what neutrinos are.
It is a little curse of knowledge going on.
Yeah, no, but you should know what neutrinos are because you should be intimately familiar.
Not everybody knows. A lot of people know.
But you should know. But you should be intimately familiar with neutrinos because
make us understand.
I'll tell you because the sun, the nuclear reactions powering the sun produce light and heat, but they produce neutrinos, and these neutrinos interact so weakly that they can go right through the Earth without even knowing it was there.
And through us.
And through us. And so every second of every day, 1,000 billion neutrinos are going through every square centimeter of your body. And during the day, they're coming down from above with the sun.
But during night,
at night, just think of it, they're coming up through the Earth, through your bed.
This explains a lot.
Yeah, that's right. So, exactly. So think of that tonight when you're going to sleep. Just think of that, okay? Neutrinos are fascinating. So, but there's a big problem. There are too few of them. We know how powerful the sun is. We know how many neutrinos should be coming out because we know the nuclear reactions, but we got the wrong answer. And it was a big problem for many years. And one day I realized, because I work on this other stuff called dark matter, that in fact, if dark matter could be captured by the sun, it would change the processes and it would solve the problem exactly. And I mean, it would literally, it was one of those rare moments.
Be captured by the
sun, and it would change the heating processes in the sun, and it would solve this problem. And you could solve the two biggest problems in cosmology, the solar neutrino problem at the time, and dark matter, all at the same time, to show that it had this. And I remember it was an epiphany. It was the middle of the night, and I realized this, and I felt that moment that you feel that this is the first time in history that anyone's ever understood this, and I was just so excited about it. And it was wrong. I mean, it was right.
I was just going to say, that's how I felt when I thought I had the secret to how to win at the races.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the thing is, it wasn't wrong. All the mathematics worked out. It was right. It's just nature didn't adopt it. I mean, it was nature's problem, not mine. But I remember that thinking, you know, it's amazing because it just seems so beautiful. But once it was clear that nature didn't adopt it, I had to throw it out. The other version of that is the other moment when I had a few years ago, a bunch of years ago, was thinking about all the data in astronomy, and with a colleague of mine who you've worked with, Mike Turner, in fact, and I realized the only way to really, it looked to me, to explain everything that was going on in cosmology was if empty space had energy. So we wrote a paper saying empty space, and we even said exactly how much there was.
And you signed your names to it.
And we signed our names to it. And it was crazy, because it was Einstein's cosmological constant. It was the thing that he said, the biggest mistake he ever made, the biggest blunder he ever made. We called it the cosmological constant is back. And we wrote this paper, and I mostly wrote it because it was heretical. Really what I thought was the data's wrong. And I want to show the only way you can explain this data is something absolutely ridiculous, so the data must be wrong. And so I went around the country giving lectures on it, and people would smile politely and then ignore it. And it turned out to be right.
Now, how did you know it was right?
Well, no, it wasn't me. It was these people who discovered that the effect of this dark energy, in fact, is causing the expansion of the universe to accelerate. And in fact, they won the Nobel Prize for that discovery, as well they should. And you may say, why would I say that? And I've asked myself that question. But as well they should, because when I talked about it, I didn't really believe it. It was just a crazy idea, and I threw it out. What convinced the world was not me, it was the experiments. And the experimentalists are the ones who changed everyone's mind, and that's what changed it. But in some sense, this great discovery was something I actually didn't believe. In the one case, I believed it, nature didn't have it. In the other case, I didn't believe it, and nature did.
That's great.
So for me, that was the two different examples. Okay, but it's nothing like sex. Well, sometimes it's better than sex. Anyway.
That's what somebody's definition of an intellectual is. Somebody who's found something better than sex.
There you go. No, but that aha experience, in fact, I used to work in science museums, is orgasmic. I mean, it's really, we are all built in. We all get pleasure from that aha experience.
Wasn't waiting during that intermission worth it? No, really.
Okay, speaking of weird things, here's a question from Neil Goldstein, which I couldn't resist asking you. And me, I guess. Oh, it's for me, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Okay. And then I'll give my answer.
All right.
It might be the same. From Neil Goldstein. Finish the analogy. The theory of relativity is to the cell phone as the Higgs boson is to...
is to something we'll find out in 100 years.
Okay, interesting. You're much more optimistic than me. My answer would be, as the Higgs boson is to, we don't have the slightest idea,
well,
and that's what makes it.
That's what I mean.
But we may never find out, but we'll just keep trying.
But I think the odds are pretty good. My guess is, and I have no way of knowing this, I'm just guessing, that basic knowledge leads to practical things eventually.
You know, I'm not sure I agree. I think much basic. It leads to practical things, I think, by inspiring people. But I don't think.
So tell us some basic knowledge that we got a long time ago that hasn't led to something. I'm sure there's much.
Well, you know, again, let me think of cosmology. The basic fact that the universe is expanding.
Yeah.
Now, it's led to a practical thing because it means we have in some sense, it's led to the understanding the universe had a beginning. But the fact that the universe is expanding has itself directly not produced anything. The technology that's required to discover that, the experiments that have been built to understand that, have led to an incredible amount of practical things. But the knowledge itself is just knowledge. And it's wonderful knowledge because everyone in this audience, and 100 years ago, the conventional wisdom was the universe was eternal. Yeah. And I suspect even those in this audience who think the Earth is 6,000 years old, and I hope they're none of you, even those people think that no one nowadays would say the universe has been eternal. It had a beginning. So we've changed the gestalt of human existence, but I don't think we've produced a better toaster.
To argue against my own statement, probably, I'm just wondering, do you think plate tectonics, which is basic knowledge, do you think that will ever change anything practical? I mean, it might make some trips to Europe shorter.
You know what? You know what? I want to. This is the wonder of science to me. Things are connected in an amazing way. Plate tectonics is actually. There's one of the most. It won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of this. Einstein had predicted, in fact, that there are these things called gravitational waves emitted when heavy objects are moving, and in fact, if you have a neutron star orbiting another neutron star, two heavy objects, then in fact, if they're far enough apart, the only way they can lose energy is by emitting gravitational waves in a way that Einstein could predict. Now, this guy named Joe Taylor and his student Halt, what's his first name? Randall? What's his first name? Oh, anyway, doesn't matter. Well, you're right. Thank you. So they over 20 years, they managed to see something called a binary pulsar, which is basically neutron stars orbiting each other. And over 20 years, they measured the period of that system. And the period changes by a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. Maybe, I forget what the number is, a millionth of a second, something like that a year, something like that. But they measured it very carefully. And then they said, is this what Einstein predicted? It turns out they had to know things incredibly accurately over 20 years, including the positions of the detectors and the position of the detectors around the sun. And in fact, you have to take into account things at such an accuracy that you have to worry about things like plate tectonics in order to get it right.
Oh, you have to worry about tectonics.
And they won the Nobel Prize because
take into account
you have to take account of this incredibly.
So there is a practical application.
Well, not in the sense of making a better toaster, but in fact leading to this amazing discovery. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point, I think. That when it's demanded that we have practical applications, it doesn't always have to be a toaster or Tang.
Yeah.
Tang is supposed to be one of the major things to come out of the space program, and nobody drinks it.
No, but but actually, the particle physics community fell in a big problem, and I think scientists often feel they have to justify their research by the byproducts.
Yeah.
And it's a huge mistake. So people would be arguing we were building in this country a large collider, the superconducting super collider, which would have been built 20 years before the Large Hadron Collider in Europe. Yeah. And the U.S. Congress, in their immense wisdom, and they were, it's hard to imagine it's not hard to imagine that they were smarter than they are now, but they weren't very smart. They canceled the project because it cost too much. It was $5 billion, which is the...
It's a rounding error.
Yeah, it's the air conditioning in Iraq war for a week or something like that. Now, what was I talking about there? Why was I...
I don't know. I know you weren't talking about me.
What was your question? What was your question again? I know there was a reason I brought it up.
Something about...
Oh, yeah.
Something
so
about
the
science.
Scientific community was there was a big fight in Congress about whether this should be built.
Yeah.
And a lot of the particle physicists at the time tried to justify the collider by the benefits. Because every time we build a big collider, like CERN, of course, the World Wide Web came from CERN. But that's not... If you justify something by saying, these are the side benefits, then you're implicitly saying the thing you're doing isn't important.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real problem not to stand up and say, this is why we're doing it. Of course they're going to be. Anytime you push the limits of technology, there's going to be a benefit.
The thing is, here's the nub of the problem, it seems to me. I forget who was going to testify before Congress, a great scientist, and he said to a politician on the committee, You know, I don't know anything about politics, but I do know that everybody wakes up every day wondering how the universe began. And the politician said, "You're right, you don't know anything about politics."
It's true, and in fact, it actually, you know, scientists communicating is incredibly important to talk to Congress, and we'll get to some of the questions about that, because one of the problems, and a bunch of the questions are about climate change, so we'll get to them in a second, is trying, if you're a scientist, often scientists talk to government as if the government should be interested in what the scientists are interested in. They're interested in a whole different set of questions. And if you're talking to the government expecting them to care about what you care about, you've lost. You've got to ask, you've got to say, why are they interested in this problem? Yeah. We'll talk about that. But first, we'll talk about TV and science. A number of people asked the question about pop culture embracing science, and how does pop culture play a role in communicating science? Greg and Vilkas both asked similar questions, but I'll read Vilkas' question. How do you feel about pop culture embracing science? And you think and Greg said, do you think pop culture can play a role in communicating science? And they both talked about the Big Bang Theory.
I haven't really watched The Big Bang Theory. I'm sorry.
You can just answer generally then. I happen to like The Big Bang Theory.
Well, because you're on it. What do you mean?
Well, I was there. Yeah, that's the reason. But they show good taste. But
I just haven't watched it. But there's I think a very good picture as a movie out now, and I think it's pretty accurate as far as the.
I hope you don't say the movie I'm thinking about.
Probably I will. What are you thinking about?
If you're going to say Interstellar, I'm going to say ooh.
Oh my God, no.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh no.
No. Good.
No, I'm thinking of The Imitation Game.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Right? I mean, that's a very human story. It's poignant, and it just kills you what they did to that guy when he could be credited with ending the war.
Yeah, and besides being credited with making the modern computer in many ways.
Yeah, but except for a couple of shortcuts they took that I've heard from mathematicians, they were not bad on the science. And as long as you can be truthful to the science and tell a great human story, then popular culture is really advancing things, I think. But if you confirm stereotypes, or you do the worst of all stereotypes, the mad scientist, I don't think that's good.
In fact, I was a judge at the Sundance Film Festival one year, believe it or not. Yeah. And people say, why were you a judge? And I say, well, if I was Robert De Niro, you wouldn't be asking me that question. But the Sloan Foundation was actually funding a prize for not the best science movie, but the best movie that incorporated in the drama either science or a scientist, because they felt that if scientists were portrayed in a less stereotypical way in popular culture, then it would become more familiar and less intimidating. And so I was judging films at that point. But I think that by making science a human activity and showing that scientists are many different kinds of scientists, and particularly showing women as scientists on TV is what I didn't like. You can applaud. It's okay. But you know, one of the things I liked about the X-Files, and there's a lot I didn't like, is
I never saw that.
Is that the skeptical one was the woman, and the guy believed absolutely everything, and. But I think I happen to like a lot of my colleagues hate the Big Bang Theory because of the fact that it has these nerdy scientists, and none of us know scientists like that. But you know, it's very clever, and there is science in it, and they're very likable. So I guess I don't personally have that revulsion. I think I happen to think it's such an intelligently written program, and the characters, for all their nerdiness, are in many ways endearing, and I think and they grow, and you get to see them as different. During the time of that series, you get to see different aspects of them as human beings. They started out.
It's been on a while. Do we have any indication that young people or students are more inclined to go into science because you can be nerdy and get the girl next door or something?
They do get. In fact, the nerdy guy does get the beautiful girl next door, which is something
really
that we all
boost
aspire
science
to.
alive.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now let's go from that to a little more serious, because there's a few questions about about related to climate change from Kim and Ladon, and I'll read them both. Kim, well, let me read Ladon's first. Do you think poor communication from climate scientists is why some people don't believe in that climate change is real? Question mark. And another one who was obviously a climate scientist, I guess, said, I was told to teach global climate change without emotion. What do you suggest?
Well,
go ahead.
I think I understand that. Let me take the last one you said.
Yeah.
My impression would be that it's understandable that you want to make sure that you convince the other person you're talking to, especially if you're in a teaching situation where you're talking to students, you want them to have a grasp of the facts and not to go home and say, my teacher has this strong feeling that climate change is happening. But if you're, and I think teaching is a different situation. And when you're teaching, you really want them to know the intricacies of them. You want them to achieve a state similar to the curse of knowledge, where they understand something in all its complexity. But if you're talking to lay people and they're getting a casual appraisal from you about global warming or climate change, I think you have to communicate to them in a way that they're used to being communicated with in normal life. They have to hear stories, they have to hear personal accounts, and I think they have to trust you. They have to feel familiar with you. They can't feel that you're speaking down to them from on high, and you know, and they're these poor ignorant slobs who don't get it. That's not going to make them believe in it, or I mean accept it. I don't mean believe.
We don't like to use the word believe.
I don't. I avoid that. Yeah, but one of the things, it's a real language problem, I think, because people who deny climate change have somehow managed to use the word skeptic to describe them. And the press calls them skeptics. Yeah. They're not skeptics, they're deniers.
Yeah, I just wrote a piece saying that we should call them deniers. Yeah.
The thing about skeptics is scientists are professional skeptics.
Yeah.
They're the real skeptics, and they have attacked the science themselves the way Feynman used to.
Yeah.
Before they released it to the public, because not only themselves personally, but they attacked each other. That's what peer review is, and contending theories and so on, contending evidence. And they've sorted that out as much as they could. So they're skeptical before they ever get
exactly.
In public
People have this misunderstanding of science that we all get together and sort of shake hands and say, okay, this is it. This is the story.
I think we can sell this.
Yeah. We can sell this and get money. And in fact, the way to become famous and respected is to prove your colleagues wrong.
Yeah.
And so what you do every day when you go into work is you try and prove your colleagues wrong. And so the fact, it's not as if it's the same it's true for evolution. People seem to think scientists believe in, and quote unquote believe, and I hate to use the word, but accept evolution because somehow they like it. The point is, if someone could show it was wrong, they would become, then they'd become the most famous scientists in the world.
Right.
The reason it hasn't happened is because the experiments tell us it's right. And this idea of skepticism, and in fact, as I say, I wrote a piece for Slate, I guess, it said we shouldn't call them skeptics, we should call them deniers. But we were talking about this earlier in the day. The other thing they've usurped in language is this idea of uncertainty. Yes. That somehow they say, well, there's uncertainty, but the thing they don't realize is that uncertainty is the greatest asset of science.
It's great.
Because it's the only area of human activity where you could actually quantify what you don't know. And so when scientists quote an uncertainty, it means something. And so everything is uncertain in life. But the fact that you can say that something has a 95% likelihood actually means something. And so I think we as scientists, in fact in schools, should teach more about this notion of uncertainty, because people think you know things exactly. We don't know anything exactly.
My guess is that whatever the best arguments are for an acceptance of the notions of climate change that scientists have discovered, whatever those arguments are, that's up to the scientists. But one of the things that I think is going to make a big difference in the public's accepting those facts and those arguments is if they are taught a greater understanding of how science works. Just what you just described. In addition to which they need to understand decision-making based on evidence.
In fact, you know, that in that way, I'm glad to hear you say it, because I was going to take exception with what you said earlier, which is sort of a distinction between the way you teach in the classroom and the public. I don't think we want to endow students with the detailed knowledge. I really don't think. I don't think that's important at all, especially at a high school level.
Okay.
I think what we really want to teach them is how to get that knowledge. It's how to distinguish fact from fantasy, how to be skeptical, the scientific process. And so what we want really to do is to say, look, here's a technique by which you can ask yourself, is it reasonable that human industrial activity is changing the climate? And what are the processes by which scientists come to this conclusion, and is it reasonable? And so I think, you know, as a physicist, when I teach, I think we all do this. When high school teachers assume kids know nothing before they get into high school, and it's a reasonable approximation. And then but when I teach physics, and I think many of my colleagues feel this way, we assume that basically they haven't learned much in high school because they've forgotten much of what they get, because that stuff isn't important. We tend to teach people, and we want to make them clones of ourselves. As physicists, we teach people, we think everyone's going to be a physicist, but most of the people aren't. What they're going to get out of your class, if it's anything, is the tools that will be useful for them later to make estimation,
a way of thinking.
A way of thinking,
and a way of evaluating the thinking of others.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what good is it for the public to complain about work scientists are doing if they can't raise questions that are relevant to the work? Or if all they say is, well, that sounds crazy, then that doesn't get us anywhere.
Well,
it might be crazy, but you've got to have the understanding of how they're arriving at their conclusions.
And the tools to be able to realize it, to read critically when you read the newspapers, and you hear people deny climate change, and you have to ask yourself skeptical questions like, what do they have to gain by saying that? It's a simple question to ask. You know, is the climate scientist who's talking about the models that thousands of them have worked on their whole lives, do they have a financial benefit, incentive to say what they're saying, versus say a senator in a state which has West Virginia where coal is going to get him elected, and who's got the more incentive to talk about what's realistic? And I think that kind of skepticism is something we have to encourage.
Of course, on their side, they say that scientists believe in climate change so they can get all these millions of dollars in funding.
Well, and then the interesting thing is that
which they don't get.
The total budget of the International Panel on Climate Change is less than the advertising budget that's been used by the deniers.
No kidding.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. You can look at the funds. Okay, anyway, let's move on. This is to me, but I think maybe we could talk about this as sort of
No, I'll
art
just
science.
listen. That's good.
Okay, good. Oh, yeah, okay. I don't think people want to hear you listen. Dr. Krauss, what makes you believe that Mozart and Shakespeare were not composing and writing for the immediate commercial benefit?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a good
Go
question.
ahead.
And I think the answer is, of course they were. Just like I assume you acted to
I didn't act for free.
Yeah, you didn't act for free, okay? So necessity is the mother of invention. We have to realize that, of course, people are making a living. But you chose to act, and they chose to write and do music, I like to think, not because they thought they were going to become rich and famous, but because you loved acting. And they got personal joy from writing and the music. It's no one who does what they do well can do it. No one can spend the time rehearsing and spending their life acting or writing music or doing science or writing books if it didn't please you, because the effort is so great that if you were disinterested, you couldn't do it. So, of course, we all exist to live and eat and do the rest, but we choose how to make ourselves. If that's all we did, then being human would be no different than anything else. What makes human worth being human is the stuff we do other than the stuff that makes us eat and drink and reproduce. Anyway, that's my opinion. Okay.
I'm still digesting that.
Okay. Do you want to digest it any longer?
No, that's fine. That's
okay.
good.
Well, we'll see. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. This is the question to both of us from Mackenzie. As a poet, I often hesitate to write things I worry might not be relatable or interesting. Do you ever experience this fear in science about asking the right questions or conducting the right experiments? Any advice on conquering that fear that you're wasting people's time?
I think that's a good question.
It is a good question,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Do you ever worry about wasting people's time with
Absolutely not.
No.
No, I think my own feeling is that you don't know. It's presumptuous to assume that you're wasting people's time. You find out by trying.
Yeah.
And so empirically, you say, is this interesting? I think it's interesting, but I don't know if you're going to think it's interesting. And what you build is intuition. I think as an actor or a scientist or a communicator, you learn by trying and failing, like you do in anything, to what people are interested in and what they're not. So if you don't try, you never know.
I think it may start with writers the same way it starts with a scientist. You're drawn to something out of curiosity. You see an image in your head, maybe, and you wonder what that is. What is that person doing? Who is that person? What is that scene? And you want to know more about it. And at a certain point, you may see, for instance, if you're in a dramatic piece, that you really have to make sure the audience cares about the person you're writing about. So you do have to do, but it doesn't mean that you have to start out that way. I think it would be a mistake to say, what do people want to hear from me about, and write about that.
Well, let's ask about Marie Curie. I mean, did you...
I wrote it because I was in love with her.
Okay, so you didn't care what people thought either then?
No, but then I've been working for 5 or 6 years on making sure as well as I can that they care about her struggle to survive and what she's chosen to do.
So basically what you try and do as an artist or a writer is try and, if you think it's interesting, you try to find reasons to make others think it's interesting too. And you do your best job as possible.
If I feel that, unless it's obvious that they're interested already. But the thing that makes it original is that you found something that people may not be so familiar with.
Yeah. And
you want to share it with them, so you've got to find a way that they'll find it an appetizing meal.
So to the advice I would give to Mackenzie is advice I heard Richard Feynman once gave, which is, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. Someone else said that too, I think, but I remember.
What did that mean, by the way, damn the torpedo? Who had the torpedoes? The other guy?
Yeah, the other guy.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. Just don't care. March ahead. Keep going.
I thought it was something like, Captain, the torpedoes aren't working. You never know. I mean, you got to ask these questions.
Yeah, it's true. Exactly. There's a good skepticism. Good. Well, I think the last question I'm going to give to you, Alan, which is from Charlie, and I think what was the best answer you have ever seen to a flame challenge question? Oh,
well, boy, the winning answers have been so good. The first one, I think it was because it was the first one. It was so thrilling that somebody had come up with something so great, and each one after that has been wonderful. But the first one was, what is a flame? And this doctoral student who was American but studying in Austria was sick and tired of having to repair his equipment. I think he was studying physics, light physics, I think. And he said to his boss, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm going to enter this contest. I only have 2 weeks, and I'm going to go back to my house and work on this for 2 weeks. And he went home and he told his wife and children, you won't see me for 2 weeks. I'm in the basement. He wrote a 7-minute video, animated it himself, wrote a song, played the music, sang the song, and played the characters in the thing. And it's so fun. It's so charming. And it shows you in 7 minutes so much about what a flame is that Michael Faraday, who took 9 one-hour lectures, didn't come close to the vividness of this, the engagement that this has. I'm sure he explained it in more detail.
Can you see it on, is it available to see?
You can go look at it at flamechallenge.org. Not only that, but all the other winners who were extraordinary. Each one comes in at a different angle, different versions. That one is a big, elaborate cartoon. A couple of them are so charming. One of them is just a guy talking to the audience. He's talking to the kids in the classroom. That's what is time. And the written ones are very engaging too.
Well, I hope all of you will go to look at that. And I began the evening by saying you were the only person in the world that everyone liked.
Yes.
And you said I was setting you up. But I think we've seen tonight why that's true. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, we're giving you a standing ovation.
I know. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, you want to get up here?
Yeah, come on, get up.